on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Ranger Station, Ranger speaking.
Hi. I'd like to report a bear hug.
Okay.
Well, before I left my campsite, I was putting out my fire, and out of nowhere, Smokey Bear showed up and hugged me?
So you drowned the fire, you stirred it, drowned it again, and felt that it was cold?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah. He likes it when people correctly put out their campfires. He's pretty big on wildfire prevention. He's just letting you know you did good with a hug. He's a hugger.
I just got a bear hug from Smokey Bear. Status update!
All right, I'm going to let you go now. I've got a lot of ranger stuff to do. There are many ways to start a fire, but one sure way to put it out. Learn how you can do your part at SmokeyBear.com.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Sponsored by the U.S. Forest Service, Ad Council, and your state forester.
Wait, hold up. I don't think you know about It's Saucy. It's flavorful, extraordinary, and mind-blowing. Hey, tune into It's Saucy, where I give you nothing but the greatest music out from back then till now, along with hip-hop news and trending topics. It's DJ Steph. Just know that.
It's Saucy.
Listen to the Saucy Hour Wednesday nights at 10 o'clock here on the voice of Nassau Community College on 90.3 WHPC.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
You've accidentally cut your daughter's bangs unevenly. Do you A, line things up a centimeter from her hairline?
Man, oh man, oh man, oh man, oh man.
No. Sweatbands are so hot right now. Everyone's wearing them. Like that basketball player and that other basketball player.
B, get spiritual.
Mom, where did all the mirrors go?
A reflection could never capture our true selves.
Huh?
Beauty is within.
C, look on the bright side.
Less time blow drying, more time texting.
Or D, show empathy.
Mom, you really don't have
Ta-da! Twinsies!
I kinda love it. As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
You are listening to Beyond the Game on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Jake Volk. Sitting across from me, Brandon Johnson, Dominic Arbolino, and Eric Fischetti. And we are fortunate enough to be joined by Dan Taylor, the co-author of the late, great George Genovese's book, Fate's Takeout Slide, a baseball scout recalls can't-miss prospects who did. Dan, how are you?
I'm great. It's great to be with you guys.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you. So what exactly is your book about?
Well, we took a look at 14 players who George Genovese had crossed paths with during his life, during his remarkable career. And these were players that were expected to be big stars in Major League Baseball and who, because of unfortunate circumstances, didn't make it.
Okay. What can you tell us about George Genovese?
Greatest scout of all time. Staten Island native. Had a little cup of coffee with the Washington Senators in 1950, and in 1964 was made a scout by the Giants. He's a guy who was mentored by the great Branch Rickey in the Pittsburgh Pirates organization, and responsible for discovering George Foster, Gary Maddox, Gary Matthews, Bobby Bonds, on and on and on. And not just discovering, but what made him unique as a scout is he made these guys. He had a little amateur team, and he'd work with these guys, and they all say that the work they did with George is what helped them to succeed. So remarkable baseball man.
All right. So can you lay out for us the career of Jim Backus?
Well, Jim Backus was the high school player of the year nationally in 46, 47 out of San Francisco. Signed after the National High School All-Star game back in New York, signed with the Brooklyn Dodgers, and kind of floundering in their farm system, and at the age of 19 had an amazing spring and stuck with the Hollywood Stars of the Pacific Coast League. And at that time, the Pacific Coast League, there were players in the PCL who refused to go to the big leagues because they would have to take a pay cut. It was kind of considered the third major league. And here's Jim Backus, who goes into the Coast League, and that particular year in 1949, he had a remarkable season, Branch Rickey was still running the Dodger organization at that time, and he said there was no amount of money and no player that could be offered in trade that would make him part with Jim Backus. And along the way, he, as George and some of his former Hollywood teammates related to me, Jim got mixed up with an actress who kind of tried to take charge of his life and his career, and got on the bad side of Branch Rickey, and Branch kind of exiled him, and Jim's career went into a tailspin. He got to the big leagues briefly a number of years later with the L.A. Dodgers, but never fulfilled his potential.
Okay. And would you be able to describe to us the career of Nestor Chavez?
Well, the Giants thought Nestor Chavez was going to be the next Juan Marichal. He was signed as a 15-year-old out of Venezuela. George had an older brother, Chick Genovese, who was kind of a pioneer in scouting in Latin America. And George, in '63, was managing in winter ball in Caracas, Venezuela, and arranged for Chick to hold a Giants tryout camp in the ballpark. And Nestor Chavez was just this remarkable young talent. They called him El Latigo, the whip.
Wow.
A remarkable right-handed pitcher. And as a 16-year-old, he was in the Midwest League, and he set a number of records for complete games, for shutouts that still stand to this day. And sadly, he got up briefly to the big leagues with the Giants, I want to say 67, end of the season, September call-up. And then in winter ball in '68, gave up a leadoff single in one of the championship games and retired the next 27 in a row. Still a record in Venezuelan winter ball in the history books. And then en route to the U.S. for spring training, was killed in a horrific plane crash in Venezuela.
That's rough. Talking to Dan Taylor, the co-author of the late, great George Genovese's book, Fate's Takeout Slide, a baseball scout recalls can't-miss prospects who did. And what can you tell us about Matt Harrington?
Well, Matt Harrington was really a sad story. He was a remarkable high school pitcher, and I think most people thought in that draft, I'm trying to recall the year now, 2001, 2002, thought he was going to be the number one high school pitcher in the draft. And there were some high bonus demands floated by his agent that scared a number of teams off. And the Rockies took him, and I think there was a feeling that they could reach an agreement, and unfortunately it became contentious. They never did. He played with the St. Paul Saints in the independent ball and went back into the draft pool the next year and fell, was a second-round pick, and ultimately got injured. And really never made it at all. Last I'd heard, he's working in an auto shop in Fort Worth, Texas, and he was offered something like $4.5 million to sign and turned it down, thinking he could get more, and never did, and his career faltered.
Oh, okay, wow. As for Paul Pettit, can you lay out his career for us?
Well, Paul, maybe for people in the older generation, it's a name that might ring a bell, but. Paul may have been the greatest left-handed pitcher of all time.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it.
Yeah, that's a succinct way to put it. Paul was the first $100,000 bonus player, signed in January 1950. Now, that was all before the draft, and it was wide-open free agency. It's like college recruiting is now. And so Paul was coveted by every team in baseball, with the exception, and they wanted him. The St. Louis Browns wanted him, but they didn't have any money. So they knew they were out right away, which is sad because it was their area scout in Los Angeles who worked with Paul and changed his arm angle and turned him from some mediocre pitcher into maybe the greatest left-handed pitcher in the country at that time. Paul signed with the Pittsburgh Pirates. He was the first to receive a six-figure signing bonus, and he was also the first player to ever use an agent.
Oh, wow.
He actually signed a personal services contract with a motion picture producer. And that producer then turned around and used that personal services contract and bartered it on to the ball club. So the Pirates ultimately had to buy his services from that agent. Paul, in his he went right away. He signed in January. He was a later high school graduate, January graduate. So about 4 or 5 weeks after he graduated, spring training started. And at that time, the Pirates trained in Southern California, as did a number of teams. He went right in with a big league club, 18 years old, came in, pitched a perfect inning against the New York Yankees. But to circumvent the bonus rule at the time, which would have meant he had to stay in the big leagues, whether he was ready or not, they had set him up to go to New Orleans. And the manager there at New Orleans was a former big league infielder. Hal Luby. And Paul, in his third exhibition game, I should say, in his third exhibition game, teamed with Bob Perkey to throw a no-hitter for the New Orleans Pelicans.
Oh,
and in his third professional start, he blew out the elbow and was effectively done.
Oh, okay.
And what I should have alluded to, the manager changed his mechanics. He didn't like his mechanics. Now, this was a guy who had never been a pitcher or a pitching coach, but he decided he didn't like Paul's mechanics, changed his mechanics. Paul told me that immediately he felt a lot of pressure on his shoulder, and second inning of his third pro game, blew out his elbow and was effectively done.
All right, so would you be able to describe to us the career of Derek Tatsuno?
Well, Derek Tatsuno was a remarkable player, University of Hawaii, and he's just an icon over there on the islands. We're talking the mid-'70s, and the Hawaii program had really kind of been a club team playing some of the military bases over there, and they got a coach named Les Murakami who decided he wanted to make it a big-time program, and Derek was the target, and he convinced Derek to stay at home and pitch for him, and Derek was college baseball's first 20-game winner. And the expectation was that he was going to be a first-round draft pick. And during his junior year, his draft-eligible year, Wally Yonamine, who was an American legend, the first American to play professionally in Japan, he was a manager over there at the time, and he dropped by the Tatsuno house in Hawaii and suggested Derek give some thought to playing in Japan. And some of the information he was getting back was that they would pay a lot more than the U.S. clubs would pay a first-round draft pick. So the Padres, it scared a lot of teams off. They started to hear he was not committal on what he was going to do, scared a lot of major league teams off. Padres took him in the second round, but offered him more than the first overall pick in the draft received that year. But Derek got 4 times as much by signing to play in Japan with the Seibu Lions. And because he'd been drafted in the States, you've got this rule where he couldn't play in the big leagues over there because effectively the Padres owned his rights. So he had to play in an industrial league, like a semi-pro team. And his fastball had so much movement on it that the catchers were struggling to handle him. And the manager said, "We've got to change you." And he said, "Well, if the catcher can't handle me, don't you think the hitters would have a problem with me too?" And his first game over there for this industrial club, he pitched against the Cuban national team. And the numbers, I know he had a high strikeout total and a real low hit total. He pitched quite a remarkable game and beat the Cuban national team. And shortly after, they changed his mechanics. And the following spring, the team trained in Hawaii, and they played an exhibition game in the big stadium at Aloha Stadium against the University of Hawaii. And his former teammates, they were not happy at the idea of having to face him. And when they saw him in pregame, they were shocked because his mechanics had been changed, and he had nothing. He just had nothing. And I believe they got 19 hits off of him that day. And he could just never get it back. He actually quit. He walked out on his contract. It was a lifetime contract that he'd been offered over there and promised a management job with a hotel owned by the ball club. And he walked away from it, and the Milwaukee Brewers took him, and he never got out of Double-A ball.
All right, and can you take us through a typical day for you when you were writing this book?
Fun.
The sound of that.
Good answer.
You know, I think 3 of my favorite things are storytelling, baseball, and research. And George and I, you know, I had the opportunity to write his autobiography, and we became just great friends. And he's the one that really brought baseball history to life. I've always loved the game, loved the history, but George brought it to life because he knew so many people, and the stories he could tell was amazing. And we got to talking one day, and he had talked about so many of these guys and his exposure to them, and his friendship with some, and his frustration with some, and I said, you know, we've got to tell these stories. These are remarkable stories. We've got to bring these stories out so today's fans get to know these players because they were not failures. And so getting to meet and getting to become friends with Paul Pettit and catching up with Derek Tatsuno and these guys, it was fascinating to talk to teammates and hear the stories. Steve Chilcott, the former Met #1 pick, to talk to his teammates. And hear the amazing stories of their time with him was just remarkable. Same with Derek Tatsuno's teammates in Hawaii and Derek's stories. It was really a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it.
Talking to Dan Taylor, the co-author of the late, great George Genovese's book, Fate's takeout slide, a baseball scout recalls can't-miss prospects who did. And, Dan, I'll get you out on this. What can you tell us about the